Slow Down podcast listeners. Anyone out there feeling mom guilt? I'm, for one, or have been parent shamed, also been experienced that. This topic is so near and dear to my heart as I've made it my mission to reframe the idea of what a good mom looks like and end this parent shaming thing once and for all. My next guest, Mercedes Samudio, is a licensed psychotherapist, parent coach, speaker, and best-selling author who helps parents and children communicate with each other, manage emotional trauma, navigate modern technology, and develop healthy parent-child relationships. Mercedes started the hashtag End Parent Shaming movement, as well as coined the term shame-proof parenting, using both to bring awareness to end parent shame. Mercedes seeks to empower parents to believe that they are already great guides for raising healthy and happy children. And she is here to share all of this incredible wisdom with all of you. Welcome to the show, Mercedes. I am so happy that you're here and we can have this conversation because as a recipient of parent shaming, I know what that feels like. And as a mom, mom guilt is real. So what inspired you to make this your mission, to coin the phrase shame-proof parenting and the hashtag End Parent Shaming movement?
Yeah. So, like most things, I think it came a little bit from my childhood, being raised by my step-grandmother and not having a real traditional family. If you kind of think about what a traditional family looks like. And so in my pursuit to just kind of understand more about myself and what happened to me, I kind of stumbled into parent and family and child work. And one of the things that I noticed often in my work as a social worker and as a psychotherapist is that we oftentimes will leave parents in the dust when we are looking to support children. And so I would often look at how parent shaming or the effects of parent shaming would wear on parents. And you'd be surprised to notice that like this parent shaming space happens to all types of parents, all walks of life. There's really nowhere you can go where it's like, okay, no one's going to shame me as a parent. And I think for me, I realized that the best way to provide a healthy environment for children is to stop shaming the people who are caring for those children.
Yeah, mind blown. I mean, truly, we all walk around, I think, as parents, day in and day out, just feeling less than, not good enough. I mean, there is no rule book for parenting. I'm one that celebrates my failures and is very open about my parent fails. But it's it's the hardest job that we're ever given, that we ever take on. And there's no instruction. Every child is different. Raising children 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago is so much different than raising children today. So we can't look to our parents or our mentors or people that raised us because we're in an entirely different landscape of parenting. It doesn't even apply. So we really have nowhere to turn to really get good advice on how to help raise healthy, independent, compassionate beings. And it's really hard.
Yes. And I think the toughness of it isn't just in what you shared, but I also think it's in this idea of what does it even mean to be a parent and to raise healthy children. As you mentioned, there's no rule book, but oftentimes when I work with parents, I ask them, what tools do you want your child to have by the time they get 18? And I've never had a parent say, I want them to be, using substances. I want them to have low self-esteem. I want them to dislike themselves,
Right. Be a bully,
right.
go out
right.
and shoot for the watchtower. No, nobody wants that.
Right. And so when we then pull back and we say, okay, well, now you have a 6-year-old, what do you think needs to go into the 6-year-old for them at 18 years old to feel independent, to feel confident, to know who they are, to know what support is? And one of the things that I consistently hear over and over and over again is parents kind of look at me with this dumbfounded, I don't actually know. How do I create an independent person?
And it's not doing everything for them, right? Which is what we think. If we just do everything for them and get all the obstacles out of the way, so there's nothing, that can to get in their way, then, that's going to help raise, really productive adults. And that is not the case.
At all. And
Mhm.
I think that's something that when we ignore parents or we put these really unrealistic expectations on them, we actually are convincing them that in order to be a good person, you have to be perfect. And so, because parents are held to that perfect standard, they in turn will look at their kid and think, you need to be perfect. So that way I look perfect and that way we don't get judged. And that's humanly impossible to do. No one can be perfect. And so, my ideas have kind of materialized into two separate kind of ideas that actually link up together. One is my shame-proof parenting methodology framework, if you will, that really looks at not completely eradicating shame, because I think as long as we're humans looking at other humans, we're going to judge each other. But it's really important to pay attention to how that shame affects you as a parent and how it affects the way you make decisions. And so the shame-proof parenting framework has 6 tenets that are really about embodying a healthy human. So that way, as a parent, as a family, we're not attacking each other when things happen to us. We are coming together to say, how do we as a family continue to be resilient and continue to work together to really manage whatever this embarrassing thing is or this event is in our lives. The second framework is one that I'm currently working on right now, which is the Parental Identity Development Model. And that really looks at how do you know what type of parent you want to be through the lens of watching your child grow. And so it starts with pregnancy and this idea of nesting and how are you creating a nesting environment for your home. And it goes all the way up into your child is parenting age. And in that space, you and your child, if all things go according to plan, right? And you're moving through your parental identity in a healthy way, by the time your child is of parenting age, which let's just say like mid to late 20s, you should be sharing experiences and not fighting each other or not liking each other or not talking to each other. And the reason why I created the parental identity development model is actually exactly what you shared earlier. There actually isn't a manual for parenting. So the whole reason why I created the parental identity development model is kind of going back to what you shared earlier, which is there is no manual for parenting and there shouldn't be one. But my idea is that there's actually an identity shift that happens every time you bring a new child into your caregiver space. And so it doesn't just happen the first time and then every subsequent child, it's the same. It actually changes because the lens with which you're looking through the world changes, which inherently will influence your personality, your ideas, and who you are. And so my parental identity development model is a framework that I'm developing for mental health clinicians to understand parents the way that we understand child development, brain development, all these other developmental models. I want mental health professionals to be part of the task force of people who do not continue to perpetuate that shame and continue to perpetuate those outdated views of what makes a good parent. And instead, we're looking at how does a parent develop a sense of themselves and their competency and their confidence through raising their child at these different stages of their identity development.
I love that. I mean, and truly you're talking about from pregnancy, like giving us some education and some identity and allowing that to grow and mold. Do you think parents have been shamed by therapists? I mean, is that kind of a lot? Yeah. Okay. So they're going in thinking they're seeking help. I have a child, they're going through these issues, and you walk out feeling worse than you did when you came in.
And I think it's because we don't truly understand what it means to be a parent. So we unfortunately, we use measuring sticks that are really biased and don't incorporate other people's experiences. And so, for instance, a lot of times I think because we don't know what parenting is, a lot of mental health professionals will use, well, my mom did this or my mom did that. So if your mom did something really good, you measure that up. You measure that up with the parent you're working with and say, okay, they're doing good. But if that parent's doing something bad and you measure it up to them, now you're looking at, okay, I'm measuring somebody by what I think is good or bad parenting. There's actually no theoretical models for how to support a parent through their identity development. There are only theoretical models for child development, cognitive development, all these other things that focus on the child, but they forget that the parent also needs to feel confident and competent when that professional leaves or when that support leaves or when they're by themselves at home trying to manage a kid. Their identity is what gets triggered in that moment, right? And so if they don't know who they are, if they don't believe in themselves, if they continuously think that they're bad because they're getting all this feedback from a professional and their family and their community, when that identity kicks in, it's going to kick into something that's not healthy, and they're going to project out on their child. And for a lot of parents, they might even internalize that they're horrible and not know how to support themselves and feel so embarrassed that they don't even reach out for help. And so my idea is that we have to really support parents in developing a healthy identity so they know where to go to when there's no professional around, there's no support, and it's just them and their child trying to manage the world together.
Well, and I love, and what I hear you saying, I think, is that you're helping the individual set the parent label aside, because that looks different in each and every household with every child with different circumstances. But let's help each individual adult of childbearing age that may have children, that has children, I learn to identify with themselves and have that self-confidence that we didn't get. And so that's, which is fascinating, because I don't think at least not any of the parent books I've read, have ever addressed that at all. It's like, here's what your kid's doing. This is what you need to do. Yeah. Or, they're not addressing the issues that we walk into as adults, as grown people, that we carry our big baggage of trauma experience with us into every situation, including parenting, and then impose all of our experience on our children.
Right. Yeah. A really good example of that is I was working with a mom a few years back, and we were talking about her daughters moving into teenage years and wanting to showcase their growing womanhood, whatever that looked like, whether it was wearing certain outfits or trying different things with their makeup and their hair. And as I began to talk to the mom and listen to her anxieties and fears, we got down to she was scared that someone would mistake her daughter's trying on womanhood as being a woman and would sexually assault her. And as we talked
and had
more,
that mother had the sexual assaulted,
yes,
as a rape survivor myself,
exactly,
I very, very much. Okay. Yeah.
Right.
That makes sense.
Right. So you definitely hit right on it, where as we explored more, she talked about how not only had she been a victim of assault as a teenager, but no one believed her and no one protected her. And so she now is very overprotective of her daughters, who are now going out to a world that unfortunately is still the same as the world she lived in, where no one would listen and believe her. And so her attempt to police her daughters and control them isn't about, I hate my daughters. It's about, I'm scared for them.
I'm scared.
And so we talked about her identity and how what happened to her shaped the way she felt she could relate to her daughters. She hadn't talked to them much about their bodies, about sex, about any of that, because she herself didn't get the right education in the right space. She said something really profound to me, and I think it's something to pay attention to when we look at our own identities, is when I asked her, when did she start feeling comfortable expressing her womanhood in a way that felt in alignment with her? She said it was about 5 or 6 years ago, before she started wearing revealing clothing and feeling more sexy as a woman. And we have to pay attention to that when we're talking about, okay, why is this parent making these decisions? Why are they being so controlling and restrictive? And well, let's talk to them. Who are they? How did they come to believe their values and their ideas? Because that journey is what's going to factor into how they raise their children. And if we ignore that and we just say, focus on your child's development, well, we're ignoring that they're still developing humans too. And they're still trying to heal from the wounds or reprocess experiences the same way as their child. But we ignore that and we say, well, you shouldn't do that to your daughters and you should let them pick their own clothes. Yes, she should, but where is that fear coming from? And so once we got down to the bottom of that, she was really able then to not only just open up ideas about her daughters, but even for herself to say, maybe I do need to go back and reprocess and work on my own past assault trauma so I can be more open-minded about my daughter's experiences in her womanhood and her body. And I think that was such a great example of, because of this mom's identity, she wasn't able at her daughter's teenage years to role play with her, right? To help her figure out, what does this look like to try on this identity, or try, because she was so scared of her daughter's sexual identity blossoming that she wanted to kind of hold that back from her. And so I think really what's important for us to pay attention to is not just how we not shame parents, but how we try to understand why at this point you're getting so restrictive, or why at this point are you being permissive and not setting boundaries? It's not just because they don't know how to parent, which is usually the common thing. Oh, you don't know what you're doing. You're a bad parent. It's really because of, where did I learn that these things were scary? Where did I learn to pick up some of these maladaptive coping skills? Because that's going to show up when my child has these same experiences.
It seems you're like blowing my mind right now. And it just seems so on point, simple, But we as parents lose our identity as individuals when you
Yes.
become a big P parent, and all of a sudden you're a parent, and that has its own set of rules and confines. And so we forget that there's an individual within that parenting role. And many of us walk around without ever addressing any of our past traumas, big T, little t traumas, experiences. And it's almost like you're giving permission for the adult to be an individual.
Yes. Yes. And I love that you just shared that, because it's something I saw consistently. Once someone becomes a parent, they lose everything. The idea that I could still be a developing human, no one cares about anymore.
Right.
A really good example, again, another mom I was working with was worried about losing her identity. She was pregnant at the time and was seriously worried about losing her identity. She was very much a woman who was into outdoor sports and kind of, biking and hiking. And a lot of the things she did, people were telling her, you can't do what you're a mom and you can't do anymore. And you have to stop all that. And she was getting super anxious. And we began to talk about how she can keep pieces of her identity, even though the first few years of being a mom might be more all encompassing than you believed it to be. Then she said, Mercedes, can I show you something? And I said, sure. She began to tell me how much she loves the company North Face. I think that's the name of their company. Everyone knows that. Instead of sending her something, they sent her baby something. So she showed me this little baby snowsuit where she's like, this is what happens. Everyone knows I love this. And to support me would be to send me something like that. But because I'm a mom now, I've been lost. Now my baby's going to get North Face stuff. And I'm upset about that. And she said,
yeah, who doesn't get, like, when someone gave you a gift at a baby shower for you, you freak out. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm still here.
Yes.
Someone, I'm over here. I know I'm growing life and giving birth to life, but I'm over here. Someone gives you like a bath salt or a robe or something nice for you. And it is like maybe very limited times, maybe 5% of the time, but that is an impactful experience when someone recognizes you and it seems so silly.
Right. And I think that's the piece of it that's so important about the model that I'm creating, because it helps to remind people there's still a human growing as they are watching and raising another human who's growing. And so the model really lines up, like I said, with the child stages. And when we think about, again, I have to talk about the systemic idea of that too, because not every parent brings a child into the world through pregnancy. And so what I talk about in this space is, what did your nesting phase look like? So I call it pregnancy, but what did your nesting phase look like? Whether it was bringing your child home from adoption or getting your child through some other means or IVF or surrogacy, like maybe you didn't carry the child, but what did your nesting space look like, right? The model is actually really good too, that even if I meet a child when they're 10, I can go back and say, okay, what happened in this infancy space or in this toddler space? And how did you grow as a parent, or what did you believe? Another reason why I like this model and created it is also so we can understand where a parent is at this child's point in time. Oftentimes we expect parents to know a lot, but they've just had a kid for 3 or 5 months, right? They haven't had a child for a long time. And so at each of these stages, we look at, when you have an infant, where are you? What are you thinking about? What's going on for you? How are you showing up in the world with an infant? And so we're not pressing on and saying, you need to know all of these things. We're also slowing the parent down and saying, because you have an infant right now, all you need to be paying attention about is learning about you and your child. Right? It's the learning stage. You don't need to know what's going to happen to them at college. You don't need to worry about what type of personality they're going to have when they're 15. In this infancy stage, the parent is slowly learning not just about their kid and their child's needs, but they're also learning about themselves. What do I need now? I've had so many new moms tell me, I get emotional about things I never cared about before, or things scare me now I never thought of before. Those are all signs of a new identity emerging, right? Before I had a child, I didn't care about not eating. Now I'm very aware of I got to eat because I've got to keep breast milk going and I've got to be healthy, right? That's an identity shift, right? And so in that infancy stage, many new parents, and not just mothers, but many new parents are figuring out, who am I now that I have someone to care for, right? And what's funny is that happens every time you have a kid, because now I have 2 people to care for. Now I have 3 people to care for, right? That infancy stage is still learning, because you're not just, again, learning this kid. You're now learning, okay, how are the other kids going to react to this kid? How is the household going to respond to this new person? And so at each stage, I'm teaching parents and mental health professionals, this is what to expect from a parent who has a child at this stage. not to expect more out of them. The parent, the professional, the support system, we all now know if you have a infant, all you need to be doing is focusing on learning about you and the child. That's all you need to be focusing on right now.
Yeah, that's really impactful and incredible. And you're educating other therapists because it's not the typical approach. It seems really new and different. And, I've grown up in therapy. I've been in a lot of therapy and therapy about my children. But I imagine, too, that identity changes in the household as the children's identity change.
Correct. And that's why I made it based on the child's age, because you don't know how you're going to respond to a 4-year-old until you have a 4-year-old in the house. Like everyone thinks they know, oh yeah, I'll do this and I'll have it all set up. Once you have a 4-year-old, you're like, okay, now I know who this person is and what they want and what they need, right? And so at 4, right, we're in that toddler age where now we're starting to learn how to adapt. Right? I've learned who this person is, but both the child and the parent are learning how to adapt to each other. The child is coming to their own understanding of, I want juice. I want to play. I want to watch, Peppa the Pig, like they're starting to come into who they are, but so are you. You're starting to feel more confident. Okay, I can keep someone alive. Okay, I got this, okay. And I think in that adapting phase, you're also adapting to the child you actually have versus the child you wanted. And for a lot of parents, they don't have a space. And so I'm giving that toddler space back, where it's like at every stage you get to now say, okay, this is what I was hoping would happen, but this is the child I have. How do I adapt to that? How do I grieve for that? How do I support myself through that? And at each stage, you're giving yourself the space to say, I'm learning, I'm adapting, I'm exploring, right? When I get to have a tween, I'm starting to question the world because my tween is questioning the world. When your 11-year-old says that's not fair, take a step back and say, they're actually right. That isn't fair. Because your kid is coming into the world, you get to almost, and this is something that as a trauma survivor myself, I love this piece of it. You also get to relive these and reparent yourself through this too. If you were a toddler who always got told to shut up, you get to now say, you know what, I'm not going to do that to my toddler. And I'm going to learn how to adapt to not even do that to me internally. I'm not going to tell myself to shut up all the time internally, because now I have to teach my toddler it's okay to speak. It's okay to share.
Yeah.
Right. And so you kind of almost get to reparent yourself, because now you get to see the world through the lens of a 4-year-old and say, wow, when I was 4, no one let me do this. But now I have the opportunity to change that environment for myself, right? My own internal narratives, but also for my 4-year-old.
Yeah. I'm getting emotional. Yeah, it is so incredible. And it just spoke to me, doing the trauma work that I've done in the last 10 years or so. And I felt going into that work that I wasn't necessarily even healing it for myself, but it was for my daughter's daughters. And it was clearing the energy for the female energy to come in generations that I may never see. And I had this calling to kind of clear this trauma energy. And as my daughter goes into being 12 and a half, 13 years old and getting into that phase, I feel so much more confident to give her space to be an individual and to be able to be a guiding factor. And unlike what I was told, which is, I wasn't given, no one talked about sex or boundaries or parenting, I just kind of winged it. I didn't do very well. So, and it's a really tough space. And I imagine it has to feel for the clients and parents that you're working with almost like a sigh of relief. That's how I'm feeling right now. Like this. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. In that moment, because we run around and we feel all of the guilt and shame and everything that we're doing as a parent, and everyone has an opinion from, the day the baby's born and beyond. And everyone wants to put their, ideas and confines and restrictions and opinions on you. And it's space for them to just exhale.
Yes. And I think it gives us all, like I said, there's no right or wrong way to parent. I know that sounds really weird because it's like, well, parents abuse. But again, we have to realize that a lot of times this stuff doesn't just come from people's lack of parenting skills. It comes from what we believe about our role. And if there's nothing out there for us to say, how do I develop this identity? How do I heal this identity? Then no one will. And so I think what this model is trying to do is trying to take this idea of parenting and raising children out of this abstract kind of, it could be anything, to really saying it's a journey to creating a new identity. It's a journey to healing healing maybe the child that you never got a chance to heal. And it's even a really great framework for us to understand as we transition out of being just an adult and just living our lives. What does it look like to now take on the responsibility of caring for another person? How does that change me? It does, but we have no framework to show how does it actually do that. And so I'm hoping the parental identity development model will really support this idea of parents do change once they move into this caregiver role, but how? And how do we support them? And how do we not feel like we have to rush them or place such abstract, impossible expectations on this role?
And that's where the parent shaming part comes from. You know, when you deal with
Yes.
parents that have been shamed and walk in feeling less than, how do you give them the coping tools? Because we can't control the outside world. We can't control the Instagrams and the mom circles and the people that we're going to come against. But how do you give them the power to kind of go out there in the world?
Yeah. One thing we talk about often, and I often share this with my parents, is tell me exactly what it is that you're looking for in your family, right? It helps you to really kind of say out loud the things that matter to you. What are your values? What's important? And I often will say, once they've shared everything, I say, who else knows that in your family? Does your partner know that? Do your children know that? Right. And they will say, some of it, not all of it. And I'll say, this is a great opportunity for everybody in the family, especially if you've got older children who are starting to come up with their own values and are starting to come up with their own ideas about the world, to just sit down and say, we haven't really talked about deep stuff like what are our values? What do we think about respect? Oftentimes parents will say to me, I want my kids to respect me and be responsible. I'll say, what does that mean? How do you know your kids
What
are
does that
being
look
respectful?
like?
Yeah. Right. But it's also good to ask your kids, what does that look like? Because when you say, I need you to be respectful, Jessica, right? It's like, well, what does she hear? Right. When you hear that, and what am I saying? And so oftentimes I'll share with parents, it's really important to find time in your family for everyone just to come together and talk without everyone walking to and fro, talk without everyone being on their devices. Say, this is like, I call them family meetings in my work, but you can call them whatever, family time, special time, whatever you want to call it, where at least once a week we sit down and we just say, how's everyone doing? Hi, right? How are you doing?
Right.
Right.
Remember
and be intentional.
me?
Right. Mm-hmm. And being intentional. Because again, if you live in the house, and last year we definitely lived in the house way more than we wanted to, sometimes we're still not even intentional about really sitting down and saying, how are you? And giving space to listen and giving space for that person to share.
When you're in each other's space all the time so much that you forget that you have these individual relationships with each one of your children, and then the collective relationship as a family, and all need its own set of nurturing, attention. And we think, well, we're just around each other all the time. I'm picking you up from school and I'm running you to soccer and I'm doing this and that, or we have dinner or whatever. But we don't stop and check in with each of us. Say, how are you doing, really? And be interested in their life. And it would be amazing to get that feedback. And so I love that. I really do. And I think that is important to recognize that each one, like I talk about like a marriage, that third piece, I have to take care of me. My husband has to take care of him. And then we have to work on our marriage. But I have that with each one of my children. I mean, that same relationship that needs its third entity. My daughter, Eva, is her, and she's got to work on her, and I still have to do my work. And then we have to work on the relationship between her and I, which looks different than that with my stepsons and that with my other daughter. And, that is really just, again, you're just dropping some knowledge on me, Mercedes, that is blowing my mind. And I'm sure that of all the listeners. You mentioned we started talking about putting the devices down. How does that impact parenting? It's become such a crutch and also such a negative, we've given them to babies now because we don't want to deal with it. So you see the kids at the restaurant and they're like babies and they're watching and I don't even know what, but it becomes this kind of like pass off situation. But it's also then our source of frustration as a parent because we don't want them on their devices. It's such a necessary evil that is in our world. How are you managing that?
Yeah, I think, I've also really shifted my ideas about it since last year because everyone had to be. It was the only way we could work and go to school and connect with people.
Right.
But what I often tell parents is this: it's about being intentional about the time you spend. So if you do spend time watching Netflix or playing video games, are you being intentional or is it just mindless? Right. And so everyone needs outlets to just veg out, right? So if I veg out watching a TV show, that's not horrible. If my child veges out playing Minecraft, it's not horrible. But are we thinking about where's some intention? So if I know my child loves video games, can we intentionally decide to spend time together playing video games, right? If I know my child loves TikTok, can we intentionally set some time for them to share with me some of their new videos that they found or some of the videos they're doing, right? If I'm into something. And so I think it's really now, it's not so much about getting rid of it because unfortunately
it's here to stay.
Yeah. It's here, right? But how can we find more intentionality? How can we set some guidelines in the family where when we're talking to each other, let's put them down, right? But if you're taking some time to chill out or if you're doing homework, obviously they're there, right? I also think observing how people use it and giving them alternatives. So if you notice your kid always goes to it when they're bored, thinking about, okay, that's one thing you can do. Here are some other things in the house or around our neighborhood that you can do instead of going to the device, because sometimes people just don't know what else to do when they're bored. Check your own use. What do you do when you start to get bored? Do you pick up the phone or do you get up and do something? And again, it's not about judging. It's just about let's observe to see how do people even use technology in the house, and then sit down together and say, so this is what I've noticed, how would we like to do this more intentionally? Or how can we support each other in a way that is not judgmental, but is helping us be more mindful about how we're using it? And it has to be a whole family thing. It can't just be the kids, right? All the adults, everyone in the family, the animals, right? We all have to be on the same accord of if we're going to say the kids can't use it, X, Y, and Z, then are we paying attention to how the adults in the home are using it as well? And so I think, again, my idea is observe, be intentional, and set benchmarks that actually align with how your family uses technology, not how some parent coach says you have to do it.
There's some person on Instagram. It was interesting when I gave my daughter her phone for the first time, we had a big conversation and talked about being intentional. I said, when you go on your phone, make the choice that you're going on your phone. I said, because it's so easy. Social media is designed, YouTube's designed to get sucked in. And you see the people, adults, everybody's like glazed over. Look, that's how I was at the slot machines in Vegas. I'm like glazed over. And I was but I said, it's okay to be on your phone, but just know that you're being on your phone. Same thing myself with social media. And whatever, I love that what you said is like, we all want our downtime. And my daughter that's 9 that comes in is like, Mom, can I have some time to relax after we do our homework and we get the lunches made or whatever? And I'm like, that's fine. Her to relaxing is getting lost in a YouTube or doing a coloring game, or it's being on a device. She'll play and do other things. But I love that in her own way, she's coming in and saying, I'm being intentional with this choice. Can I have this time to zone out? And we forget as adults, they have their own stresses too. Yeah, I remind myself, even though they're little people in their world, their stresses are tens just as ours are tens. And no, they don't have to pay the bills and they don't have to go to work, but they're going to school or they have their own stresses, anxieties, frustrations, world chaos that they're living in. And as much as we like to have downtime or escape or unplug or do whatever it is we like to do, reminding ourselves that even though they're small, they're still little humans. They're having the same experiences, just maybe on a different scale.
Yeah. And you bring me to something that, again, is really why I'm doing this work. And we talked about it earlier, but oftentimes the adults who become parents got told when they were kids, you don't have any needs, you don't have any feelings, right? You don't have to pay bills. So you began at a young age to ignore your experiences because they don't seem severe enough or intense enough. Then those children grow into adults who now raise children who they'll say that, breaking a crayon is not that big of a deal, right? Like we're at 3 years old.
It is when you're 4.
A big deal. Right?
That's a really big deal.
Right. And so because we have adults who, like you said earlier, once you become a parent, you lose that identity. All of those heartbreaks, all of those traumas get lost as well. And we forget that the parent you're judging for letting their kids be on, YouTube all day, or the parent you're judging for spanking, or the parent you're judging for not doing parenting the way you would do it, is coming from a lot of trauma and a lot of experiences that no one
generations of experience.
That no one
Major
said,
history.
you
Yeah.
matter. You can't, I want to hear what's going on for you. And so we have to pay attention to that when we start to judge parents, because are we judging the identity of parenting? Are we judging the whole human? Right. And so we have to really pay attention to that. And that's something that I really want to bring awareness to. How are we judging humans who become parents?
Have you been able to do that with this movement? What has been the kind of support and outpouring on this, the hashtag end parent shaming movement?
Yeah, really good support.
Yeah.
People use it a lot. If you search it online, it's out there. People are using it. The book Shame Proof Parenting kind of was bred from the responses that I got. As soon as I started using the hashtag, I would get DMs and just message people saying, I didn't know this was a term, or I'm just not starting to realize people are shaming me. They're not trying to give me advice. They're shaming me, right? Like, as I start to talk more about
backhanded compliment. I know what that's about.
Right. Where you start to realize I'm being judged for making healthy decisions, or the decisions I think are best for right now for my family. And as I began to get those ideas, I began to think, what can we do to support parents on finding themselves and learning how to stand their ground on what they might be choosing for their families? And that's where Shame Proof Parenting came from. That's where the book came from. And even from that, I was starting, and I talk a bit about the parenting identity, the parental identity in the book, but I was beginning to start talking about, how do we separate my parental identity from my whole self? So that way, if my parental identity is being shamed, I don't internalize that as this is my whole entire self.
Now I'm a bad person.
Right. Right. We acknowledge that maybe there are parts of my parental identity I can, grow on. Just like we realize parts of our sexual identity we can learn and grow, parts of our gender, our racial, all these pieces of our identity we can learn more about and grow and heal from. But when it comes to our parental identity, because there's no framework or model, people don't even know how to recognize my parental identity is being attacked, not my whole being self, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think starting to stand your ground as parents, you first have to be confident enough in the skin that you're in. Yes. And then you can layer on, I'm a wife and a mother and a, sister, and, this is my career, this is my job, and all of these other layers, and kind of peel them back and realize that, these are all parts of you, but they aren't you as a whole.
Yes. Yes. And each part of you can be in various levels of healing and growing, right? So I think oftentimes, because our world is especially our Western world, is very capitalist and very
black and white.
Right. That our career identities usually get, and our academic identities usually get a lot of validation because you need to go to school and you need to work. But these other people, our emotional ourselves, our mental selves, those get pushed down because those are traits that people don't care about in this world. We don't care about someone's emotional self. We don't always ask about someone's mental well-being, but we do say, oh, how are you doing at your job? Oh, you lost your job? Oh, where'd you go to school? Right? Those things are impressive and cool. Saying, I've actually done a lot more meditation than normal. No one gives you a medal for that. Everyone's like, oh, okay.
That's where I hope we get to, right? I hope we get to how is your mental health today? And if you're meditating all the time, people are going to be like, you are so incredible. You're such a badass for all that meditation and mindfulness. You are so self-aware.
Right. But we don't praise people for that at all. We actually think they're weird when people say, oh, I'm going to a meditation retreat. We're like, oh, okay.
It's just going to sit around for a few days.
Right. Exactly. And I feel like that's something that we also need to incorporate. I hope 2020, really showed us that mental health matters more than we thought it did. But I'm really hoping that we do, like you said, get to this world where when we ask how someone is, we actually care about different parts of them. We don't want to just ask it in passing or just to be polite. We really do want to listen to how someone's doing and listen to the parts of them that need support. Someone asked me the other day, how do I get a parent to listen to me? I say, lead with, what do you need? Because you don't know what they need. They might not need any help with their parenting. They might need just respite, or they might need help with their health, or they might need help with their bills. So when I assume you need help with your parenting because I see you having a hard time with your kid, that isn't always what the problem is. I might just be having a hard time with myself, and it's manifesting in my relationship with my kid. And so when you see a parent struggling, don't think, oh, they need parenting skills. Think, I wonder what they need. What's going on for them?
That is amazing. And I think if someone walked into a therapist's office, which I think takes a lot of courage anyway, even in 2021, to ask for help, if that person in turn said, what do you need? How can I best show up for you? Versus, well, let me pull out the top 10 things you could be doing, and you need to do this and this and this, and assuming, and we also give up our power as a parent. Well, I trust this person. They're, a licensed individual. They're an educated person. They know more than me. I guess I'm just going to hand over my power and listen to and that's not even getting to the root cause of the situation. Because you're right. It could be bills. It could be mental health. It could be physical health. It could be friction in the home. A million different things that could be going on that's showing up as trouble, discourse, things with a child, but that may not be the main focus, the main issue.
Right. And oftentimes, I've learned that children are kind of the holders of all of that. So when children are acting out, again, that might not even be a behavioral thing. I always think, I wonder what's going on just in general, because acting out isn't always a sign of mental health or ADHD or all these things we want to jump to throw at kids. I always think about what's going on in the family, right? What's going on with each person in the family? How are people able to talk about their struggles? Because again, when you go back to what does this family need? I'm not just going to assume it's parenting and medication for the child. I want to know, what does this family need? This kind of also goes into some of the systemic stuff I talked about earlier, where certain families are economically disadvantaged, and that will show up in how I parent. If I'm stressed out about bills, certain families are marginalized and oppressed. That will show up in how I raise my child, because if I'm raising a Black boy versus a white boy, I'm going to be talking to him a lot differently. And so when we're looking at families, I always ask people, even if you're not a mental health professional, just looking at someone, trying to figure out, what do they need? Ask, what do they need? Because there may be a lot of forces against this family that are manifesting in the child's behavior or the parenting, but it might not be what they need to help them manage things.
How do we start leveling the playing field, with racism, with anti-racist practices? Obviously that's a huge question, but as a parent, and growing and learning alongside my child, and knowing that, as a privileged white person sitting here, that I don't understand and I do have room to grow, and learning alongside my child, what is the best practice for that in continuing the growth collectively as a family?
I think what you just said is first acknowledging what you know and don't know. I often tell parents, especially when they say, oh, I'm white or I'm this, I always say, well, what do you know about yourself and your family and your culture? Because just being white, are you European? Are you French? Are you German? Where are you? Because you can start there and say, our family's actually Polish, and these are what happened to the Polish people when they migrated here. There's a whole history with that, by the way. So even if you're just white, it's do you know your history? Right, there you go, right? So you share with your family that stuff, right? And that starts. And then you say, just like we're Jewish, other families may be this, right? You get books. Thankfully, as much as the internet can be a horrible place, it could also be a really great learning tool if you know how to search or you find the right people to follow. And so I think, just like with everything else, I talk to parents about, you teach your child about their nose and their mouth, teach them about their body parts. Right? You teach your children about how to be polite and how to have manners, teach them about other cultures, right? It doesn't have to be we're going to sit down and learn cultures today. But when you decide to have a family night, decide to get a cultural food and say, tonight we're going to try this culture and we're going to learn about them. That makes it fun. So it's not just, we're going to sit down and learn history today, but we're going to, get Indian food today. And we're going to talk about where each of these foods come from. And you just taught your kid about another culture without making it a sit down, we're having a lecture about a culture, right? When you can go back out into the world, you can take them to different festivals and take them to different parts of your town where that might be a cultural hub for where you live, and say, this is where, this culture is, and this is some of the foods they eat, and this is some of the traditions they have. When your child asks questions, think, do I know the answer, before you give it to them, and say, I don't know a lot about that, but let me get some information. Maybe we can talk about it this weekend.
I think that's super powerful, because I think parents walk around thinking that they need to know the answers for everything. And the power in not knowing is almost more powerful than knowing.
I agree.
And with those little words is, I don't know, let me get back to you. Let me do a little research and get back to you. I love what you said. Let's talk about it this weekend.
Right. And I think it gives you an opportunity to realize, oh, I actually don't know about this. And let me get some real information.
That perfection idea, because as much as we think we're supposed to be perfect, our kids look at us like we're perfect. And so they continue that entire cycle as if, my mom or my dad never makes mistakes, so I can't either.
Yep.
Bring in the humanity.
That's a great modeling tool too, to continue to think about how do you bridge the gap model for your child? How do you talk to people from other cultures? Do you have friends or colleagues from other cultures, right? Because that also models, again, when we talk to children about diversity, whether it's racial diversity, sexual identity, gender, whatever it is, we have to also look at ourselves as do we have people who we even talk to like that? Before I tell my child, you need to be okay with differences, am I? Am I okay with having
friends? The work starts with you, modeling the behavior, because it doesn't matter what's coming out of your mouth.
Right. And the kids eventually learn that. You have a preteen or a teen, so they eventually start to learn you don't know what you're talking about, or you're not practicing what you preach, and they'll say it to you. And so I often tell parents, it's a really good moment for you to start realizing when your child says, well, you don't do that, think, maybe they don't see me do that. And then think, how can I incorporate that into my daily life? Or that's not something, you don't have any friends like this. Pay attention. You're right. I don't have any friends who are different than us or who look different from us. You're correct. Maybe we need to do that. Maybe we both need to be proactive about finding people who we can be friends with and connect with. And I think, again, it's just modeling. It's not about we're going to sit down and have a lecture about this. We just decide, how do we in our daily lives incorporate these small moments that, like you said, become bigger moments because your kid sees you do it, right? They see you, not just hear you talk about it. They see you every day. Put your phone down instead of pick the phone up. They see you every day. Go to cultural events and learn more. They see the way you speak to people. They hear you on the phone when you're talking about people. I remember listening to my mom gossip all the time and then tell me you shouldn't gossip. It's like, okay, mom, you know what I mean? Like, they see you do all of these things. And so it's not about being perfect, but it's about being mindful. And if your kid says, hey, I haven't seen you do that, think, you know what? You're right. Mom is not perfect. It's really hard for me to have a friend of every culture and every walk of life, but I have made a choice to have this type of friend or that type of friend. And maybe you can make a choice to have another type of friend. In that just example, you just realize I don't have to go out now and have a friend of every culture to model for my child, but I can be mindful of my kid notices. So let me be honest with them. Right. Not just say, oh, you shouldn't, don't be in my business. Like our parents used to tell us, go get some business. Right. You actually teach them. You're right. I haven't cultivated those type of things, or I don't have that in my daily life. And maybe we can both do that together. And again, I keep reiterating it because of what you just said. Perfection isn't the goal. The goal is to be a full human and show your child that it's okay to be a full human as well.
And you said earlier too, when you asked parents at the very beginning, talking about morals and values and what is important, and they may spout off diversity, inclusion, compassion. But if you're not modeling those behaviors, like maybe you need to take that time and really understand what is important to you. And if it's not aligning with what's in your head, maybe you need to level up. Right. Maybe start evaluating your behavior, get some help, get some work on that, to get to where you want to be. If you think those things are important, start to showing up in that way.
Right. I agree with that 100%.
All right. So this is a question that I love. I said, if I were to do a documentary, it would to be to go into dinner time in houses all over the world, because I think that particular snapshot is so impactful and says so much about morals, values, cultural experiences, socioeconomic class, like so much about a family. So this is an absolute judgment-free question, but what does dinner time look like at your house?
I love that. It looks like us, me and my husband, sitting in our living room, probably watching some type of Marvel TV show or some TV show, eating dinner and pausing it every 2 seconds and, talking about how it linked up with this movie and linked up with this comic, and just really enjoying that time together.
I love that. I love it. It's really beautiful. And I think it really gives us a little image of, to who you are as a person. And I think that's nice. Where can listeners find more about you and this incredible work that you're doing with parents and helping other therapists?
Yeah, so you can pretty much find me everywhere. I love the internet, unfortunately. And so if you Google Mercedes Samudio, you'll find me everywhere. But you can start at my website, which is shameproofparenting.com. And that's a great hub to learn more about the work I'm doing, the sessions I have, my book, just, kind of a great hub to start and then go branch out from there.
That's great. And are you working with clients virtually? And so people can get in touch with you? And I know you've got some classes, courses, and things that you can do. That's incredible. Mercedes Samudio, I really appreciate your time. You really have blown my mind. I got emotional. I went through the gamut of things, and I feel pretty good sitting here. I hope everyone out there listening does too, and know that really the work starts right here with you, and that you are important as an individual outside of your parenting role, and you can be seen and heard, and that makes it better for all of the humans around us. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.